realised as I'm older, I actually just am interested in deep conversation.
Yeah.
Because I really want to know what's going on in your life. I really want to know. I just don't want to know, that you changed the battery in your Ford. I want to know the depth of your life.
Yeah. The process of kind of going, what is my calling, has been really tricky and I think rewarding, because ultimately the work we do here I find incredibly rewarding, and I think it is something that I have been put here to do for now. For how long? Who knows? I'll keep doing it until God tells me to stop.
Well, I just don't feel like I'm in the in-group in the Uniting Church.
You and me both.
Brother.
You and me both.
I just never have been in the... I don't know who they are in the in-group, but I'm not in it.
Welcome back to another episode of Filthy Hope. If it's your first time here, welcome. My name is Pastor Jonty, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, Rev Ness.
Yay!
And if it's your first time here, on this podcast, what do? We spend time in the grey spaces where faith, life, and culture intersect. We just recorded a bunch of Into the Word, and my brain was in Into the Word land.
Bite-sized language. You got to do that again. Say it again. What are we?
I'll do my ABC. Welcome to Filthy Hope. On this podcast, we like to spend time in the grey spaces where Jesus, life, and culture intersect. Joining me on the panel is Reverend Vanessa Williams. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Pastor Jonty, for having me today.
It's Jonathan.
Jonathan. Are you Jonathan?
Did you not know I'm Jonathan?
I didn't know you're Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm a Jonathan.
Oh.
If we're using our full and proper names on this panel.
I'm Reverend Vanessa.
Yes. I'm Pastor Jonathan.
Oh, well, hello, Jonathan. Lovely to meet you today.
And done.
That was hilarious.
Welcome. I don't know what the hell's going on now, but we've lost our minds a bit today, apparently. Today, we're getting into some audience questions.
Yes, from the live
Absolutely.
event.
So people listening now will have had a chance to go and listen to that live event if they weren't there, because it's up in the podcast feed. If somehow you missed it, probably pause this and go back and listen to the live show before you listen to this, because a lot of it kind of flows on from that conversation. You can still listen to this if you haven't heard the live show. Just a bit of extra context will be there in the live show for you.
Maybe give some context as to the live show and that whole idea of future-proofing the church?
Yeah, right now you mean?
Yeah.
100%. We people that were there or have heard the episode already will know, but we kind of were looking at this idea that the world is going in some interesting places, and what can the church do to continue to grow
and to be relevant,
and to be relevant, to carry the gospel forward in a way that is actually going to influence the lives of people and not try and just hang on to the way that things have been.
Right.
And some ideas around like, well, where's the Spirit leading us? What do young people want? How does inclusivity look in the church moving forwards? How can we learn from some of the mistakes that we've made? How can we look at the things that we've done in the past that actually worked really well and are still valuable? All of those sorts of conversations. And we talked to 4 guests across 4 different kind of generational voices.
It was so cool.
So we got a nice widespread of voices there as well.
And we actually got to see how we often grumble and complain that we haven't gone anywhere and we're stuck in our old ways. We actually are not. If you would hear Reverend Dr. Peter Powell talk about his time in the 60s and the 70s in the church, how far we've come. Inclusivity wasn't even a thing back in the day.
Yeah, I think he said inclusivity meant changing you to beat whatever it was out of you, to conform to the model of what you were meant to look like.
Love that.
That was inclusivity.
Yeah, gosh, look at us go. Well, I think that it was an excellent conversation, but we ran out of time and we have all these excellent questions still. So that's what we're going to dive into today. Yep.
And we've got some questions for us. We've also got some questions for the guests that we're going to get to with the guests. So if you're one of those people that send us in a message about specific to one of the guests that we had, we're going to do it. We just don't have the guests with us again today. So when we have them back, which we're working on, we'll present them with those questions. But today, we've got some questions that we feel like we can answer.
Yeah.
Should we get into the first one?
Give it a crack anyway. Yeah.
Let's do it. So the first one, well, actually, we'll see how we go, but we've got 2 questions, both from Jenny. Hi, Jenny. Thanks for the questions.
Jenny.
And this first one, which I'll read out, was put into the Facebook group. So if you're not on the Facebook group and you want to be part of the conversations there, go and join the Facebook group, link down below. Jenny says, hi, Jonty and Ness. I have not come from the Uniting Church tradition. I'm an import from the Baptists.
Go the Bappos. We love the Bappos.
Love them. I thought I had all the Uniting Church terminology sorted, e.g. the difference between minister of the word and pastor. And in the latest podcast, you've now thrown deacon into the mix.
Bum, bum, bum.
With a facepalm emoji. From what I could gather, a deacon is a very different role to what the Baptists have, where deacons are more like church council members. So, what is a deacon in the Uniting Church? Ness?
Well,
I feel like you're the perfect person to ask as a deacon.
I'm a deacon. That's right. So I think we've got to really start with, can I tell you a story?
Please, that's what we're here to do.
So when I was exploring my call to ministry, God said a couple of really clear things to me. He said, corporate prison chaplaincy shape mould 3 years. That was the big audio download that I got. Then I had to go about unpacking and discerning what each of those things meant in that one download of words. And nowhere did he say deacon in that. But there was one word that I thought was interesting. It was chaplaincy. And when God actually gave me those words, one morning after I taught a spin class, I came home, I'm having a cup of coffee, and then I hear those words from God. I burst into tears. I knew that it was a call on my life to do something serious with God. Rushed into Rob and I said, corporate prison chaplaincy shape mould 3 years, quickly write that down. I'm really scared I'm going to forget what it is. He writes it down. And I said, what's chaplaincy? What is chaplaincy? Is that the Catholic guy with the smoke that comes down the aisle on the chain things?
Bells and smells.
Yeah. You know how they do?
Yeah.
They wander through. And Rob said, hang on a minute, I'll put it into Google. And up it came. Prison chaplains, school chaplains, hospital chaplains, army chaplains. And I went, oh, does God want me to be a prison chaplain? My brain went to, because how did the words go? Corporate prison chaplaincy shape mould 3 years, because prison was written into those words. I made an assumption that what God meant was prison chaplaincy. And I went, oh, shivers. I thought, wow, God's calling me to be a prison chaplain. And I didn't even really know what that meant, but I thought it meant being a person of God in a prison, telling them about God, talking about God in a prison context. Anyway, I explored my call and I discerned that the 3 year piece meant that I needed to go and study theology, because if I didn't have a good understanding of the Bible, how on earth was I going to be a prison chaplain? How was I going to do that thing that God was apparently asking me to do? And I thought, well, after 3 years, I'll keep God quiet. I'll just go and do this thing, shut God up, and meanwhile, I'm learning a lot about God. That's a cool thing. That's excellent. So I'm actively going about trying to do the things out of those words that God said to me, because I already knew at that point that my experience in life with God was that when you don't pay attention to when God tells you to do something, it doesn't end well. So it's always so much better if you be obedient and you listen to what if God's taken time to talk to you, then you should pay attention and do what God says, at least explore it. So there I was doing my Bachelor of Theology and certainly exploring the Bible and the Word, because I didn't have any knowledge of the Bible. I didn't grow up in the church, Jonty. I didn't even know the difference between Jonah and the whale. I thought the whale was Jonah. I thought they were the same dude. I know I've said that before, but it's a thing. And so I didn't really know the characters, and everybody could laugh at the Bible stories, and I didn't know. I didn't know when to sit, when to stand. I didn't know any of the rules. And so I felt very ignorant. So I go along discerning, and then I'm in Old Testament theology at Wesley College, and I'm in Old Testament theology, and we're in the book of Isaiah. I remember that much. And I hear God say, ordained minister, into my head. And I I shit myself, quite frankly, because I didn't know what that word meant either. I must have been seriously thick, but I didn't grow up doing. I went from Hillsong to Baptist church, and at this stage I was in the Uniting Church, and I knew there was ministers, like the minister of my church, Peter Davis, but I don't think I knew the word what ordained meant, but I knew it was serious because God spoke. So I got up and I bolted down to actually Reverend Dr. Peter Davis's office, burst into tears and cried, and I said, God said ordained ministry, and he laughed while I'm sitting there, snot nose and makeup down face, and said, I've been waiting till you recognise that. This is really exciting, Ness. This is what you need to do. And then he explained to me what that was, and he explained to me about the Uniting Church and what that looked like, and I started a journey. But God said those things to me. I then go off and I do all the process and get synod selection panel, and then I'm in at UTC, and I'd finished my theology degree, and I'm doing more study at UTC and going through the process of understanding my call and understanding what God wants for me in ministry. But I need to tell you this part. I need to backtrack a little bit to the synod selection panel. So you fill out all these bits of paper, like a bit like going for a driver's license. You fill out all these documents and you fill in stuff, you tick boxes. And one of the boxes was minister of the word or deacon, and you had to pick. And I went, minister of the word or deacon? God said, corporate prison chaplaincy, shape, mould, 3 years, ordained minister. Must be minister of the word. So I ticked the box. That's fair dinkum how it happened. I ticked that box and I go, okay, whatever that is, and off I go. But I'd read a little bit about deacon and minister of the word, and I had made a decision that the Uniting Church were a bit confused about deacon and minister of the word, and it didn't sound like it made much sense to me. And so I go off to synod selection panel, and I'm there and I'm doing my thing, and I'm telling them about my call, corporate prison chaplaincy, shape, mould, 3 years, ordained minister, and I'm just being who I'm being, myself. And it was Reverend Amanda Hay, who is lay minister at the time, and she said, oh, maybe she was a youth worker, I can't remember, but she wasn't yet ordained at that stage, and she was on my panel, bless her, and she said, Ness, the panel hear your call to ministry, but we think your call is to deacon, to the diaconate, not to minister of the word. And I said, right, okay, well, if you are the collected body and I hear God in and through my trusted, collected Christian people, then I am hearing that you're hearing that I should be deacon. They say, yes, how do you feel about that? And I said, well, have you got some liquid paper? We could liquid paper out my tick or cross and tick the other box in. Let's tick the other box in. I remember pissing myself laughing, thought it was the funniest thing ever. And so I went into UTC as a deacon candidate. And they were right. Those people were right. I am very much a deacon. I find myself in a minister of the word placement, but I'm largely doing diaconate work.
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So the people that are ministers of the word, and we know lots of them, they're, the beautiful, I call them the proper ministers that stand in the pulpit and they write a beautiful liturgy and they do a beautiful sermon and they care about the gathered community within the church. People at Turramurra, Reverend Phil, John Humphreys. Look, there's so many of them out there, ministers of the word. They feel called to be ministers in the pulpit in the church. In a congregation. Yeah. We in the Uniting Church call that a minister of the word, as in the Bible. Yeah. A deacon has a calling to the Bible also, but it's generally and can be quite passionately to people outside the gathered community. And my passion was for people that don't know the word. So I knew that I wanted to be with people that were on the fringes or the edges of Christianity, that hadn't experienced the love of God yet. I want to be speaking into those spaces. I want to be helping people that don't know about the love of God. I want to be walking and talking with the least of these. This is what I know that I'm called to do. I just didn't know that we in the Uniting Church call it the diaconate. Mm. So, and the calling's perfect for me. Yet I find myself able to do both jobs. And this is what we find in the Uniting Church. You'll often have a deacon working in a classic minister of the word role, which I am. And then you'll have ministers of the word working in diaconate roles like chaplaincy. And it's beautiful because we are capable of doing it all. But I think your best fit and your best use, I suppose, for your time here on this earth is doing the stuff God has passionately shaped and moulded you to do. And for me, that is the type of work that I'm doing. Yet I get to do the pulpit stuff every Sunday. Mm. I get to preach into the gathered community every single week. And yet I get to do this work on Filthy Hope, which is not the gathered community. It's our mission is for the fringes, for often the people that haven't heard the word. Yeah. And so we present it in a way that's different because there's plenty of pulpit stuff you can go and listen to and go and be a part of on a Sunday, but there's not a lot of this edgy stuff. Yeah. And I know I'm called to the edgy stuff. And likewise, the missional stuff that we do at Uniting Heart and Soul, like the Wellness HQ facility, where we provide the free counselling for people in need. That kind of work I'm deeply passionate about because it's classic diaconate work. Mm. I love that. Mm. That's my vibe. That's my jam. And that's just how God shaped me to be. And, you know, Jonty, the corporate prison, it's so interesting. Corporate prison chaplaincy shape mould 3 years. It wasn't until I got to MLC school, which I was ordained into, that the whole set of those words came together for me. There I was actually looking out the window of the job at MLC, and outside the window, inside the school, are these massive black gates and fence, and it gets shut in the day. It's like a prison. And I had one of those moments where I went, corporate prison. School is very much corporately run. A private school is a system and a corporatised system of doing school. And I found myself going, I have just fulfilled all those words that God has placed on my life. You know, and I was shaped and moulded over a 3-year period. And really transformed, ongoing transformation, which we all experience as Christians in that time. So do you think I've answered diaconate?
Pretty much. I think the only thing I'd throw in there just to underline it is that both deacons and ministers of the word have a lifelong calling and are both ordained.
Yes.
They're both ordained ministry agents.
All reverence. Yeah. You know, a classic one, somebody that our listeners might know about is John Owen, Reverend John Owen at Wayside.
At Wayside.
John O is a deacon.
Yep.
And think of the work that he's doing with the people on the street of the cross. He's classic deacon. Yep. But and I know his heart's that of a deacon, but he preaches every Sunday in the pulpit, but in a very cool and edgy kind of a way. Yeah. And that's its own special call, you know. Beautiful shout out, Reverend Sally Yabsley Bell. She's the school chaplain up at Kinross at Orange, one of our Uniting Church schools. She's just I felt like I'd found my tribe when I met Sally. Went, oh yeah, she's my person, because there's a thinking that we have that is that's same. Yeah. It's beautiful, actually.
Yeah, and even like 3-4 weeks ago, we had
Karen
on the podcast.
She's a deacon.
She's a textbook deacon.
Yes, she is. But she finds herself at Gordon Pimble in a Minister of the Word placement.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we chop and change. It's interesting, isn't it? But I suppose in other denominations, I know, say, the Catholic faith, and even maybe the Anglican faith, the deacons are, I think, seen to be a lesser of a role. You're not equal, because it's very hierarchical in certainly the Catholic and Anglican Church. A deacon is not as equal to a reverend, I believe.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
It's the language of all these words kind of exist in different movements, but have different structures around them.
Yeah, they do.
So it gets really confusing.
You know the great thing, Jonty, I'll just tell you this one thing, is that the ministers of the Word, wear a stole that goes around their neck and it goes down either side of their body. The deacons classically wear one that goes across the body like a Miss Australia sash, and it goes across the body. They're really fantastic. And that denotes out the diaconate, because the deacons are the ones that have to lift up their robes to wash the feet of the people. So our stole needs to be to the side, hooked up to. It's one that would be down the front, but ours is hooked over to the side, so that we can wash the feet of the people. Yeah, isn't that beautiful? I love that.
That's symbolic.
It's very symbolic. Yeah,
I've had a similar thing with my journey in the last kind of year, becoming a pastor. Yeah. It's the same thing, where like a deacon, that word means different things in different movements. Even just like my friends and family, when I said, I'm being commissioned into my role as a pastor, and they go, I didn't realise you were studying to be a minister or a pastor. And then I have to explain that whereas in a lot of movements like the Anglican Church or the wherever,
Church of Christ,
pastor is interchangeable with what we would call minister of the Word. Yes. Whereas in the Uniting Church, it's very different. A pastor, ministry of pastor is a lay ministry role specific to the job that you are placed in. So whereas, when Ness or Phil or any other minister that you have at your congregation finishes their placement, they move on to another church or another placement or another role, wherever it is. The title of Reverend goes with them. My role here at Uniting Heart and Soul doing Filthy Hope is a pastor role, which doesn't go with me when I go somewhere else. So it's a, I know that it isn't hierarchical, but you can almost look at it as minister of the Word and deacon. Certainly in pay structures and the organisational element of the Uniting Church sits slightly above pastor. I disagree with that, but because in theory that's not true, but in practice it kind of is. But it's the same thing where like when I explain to people that I'm a pastor, they have a completely different idea as to what it is in their brain compared to what it is in reality.
Because for pastor, you don't have to have gone through formation. No. At seminary. You don't have to have done your Bachelor of Theology or a Master's in Theology.
Don't have to do a period of discernment.
No, that's right.
There's a whole bunch of stuff you do have to do. Yeah. So it's not like you just waltz in and become a pastor.
No, but it's a calling.
But it's a calling, certainly, but it's not a, correct me if I'm wrong, compared to minister of the Word or deacon, it isn't a lifelong ordination. No. It's a commissioning into a role.
Yeah, for the period of the placement.
That's right. However long that placement goes for. Yeah. And it is still a calling. And that's
100%.
There was a long period of trying to figure out what my calling was, and that's ongoing.
Yeah, it's still. I've watched you, man. I've watched you. I've been watching you.
I still wrestle with it. Like, what am I called to do?
Yeah.
I'm at a point in my life where there are a number of opportunities, kind of like doors, kind of ajar, and so the process of kind of going, what is my calling? Yeah. Has been really tricky and I think rewarding. Because ultimately the work we do here I find incredibly rewarding, and I think it is something that I have been put here to do for now. For how long? Who knows? I'll keep doing it until God tells me to stop. And that's where I find myself now.
And it's funny because it's an interesting role, isn't it, Jonty? Because podcasts, when I suppose the word minister of the word and deacon were constructed in the Uniting Church, when we came up with that, there were no podcasts.
That's right. Yeah.
There wasn't a thing, right? And we had churches and ministers would classically preach on a Sunday morning, right? But what you're doing in this role is certainly very Bible-based. You're speaking the word. We have a whole podcast called Into the Word.
Yep.
And you're preaching and speaking, albeit in a very edgy kind of a way, and not as formal as we would do in a classic kind of setting.
Sermon setting.
Setting. But you're still doing it. And yet you're doing this work on Filthy Hope that's very, what I would class as diaconate, because we are reaching the edges and the outside the gathered community of the classic church and at the church community. And so then I think you're like this hybrid of MOW/deacon. And we have two very different ordinations.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, we say slightly different things in our ordinations, which is interesting.
It's interesting. Like I want this as an example. We've had Rev Will Nicholas on the podcast before, also known as Odd Rev. In the Facebook group, in the discussion that kind of followed this question that we're kind of in the weeds of now, he's a really interesting case.
Is he an MOW?
So I'll read what he says here.
Please.
He says, blah, 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 blah. I'm certainly one who feels the tension, having been a specified youth worker in the Uniting Church, ordained, but with a focus on the next gen for 10 years. That placement, side note, doesn't exist in the Uniting Church anymore. I have neither felt exclusive call to the gathered or the disparate and have enjoyed the calling to bridge building. Rather seeking new classifications of lifelong call. Sorry, I'm reading through some typos. Rather seeking new classifications of the lifelong calling, I would rather see us have one ordination which acknowledges the gifts and graces of each person called. As for now, I'm a UCA minister of the word, there you go, for the last 15 years and currently serve equipping the gathered congregation to engage in digital and school ministry as well as creating a faith and theology resource for the niche geek/sci-fi/gamer communities.
Oh, come on, he's a deacon.
So that's a great example of that.
Will,
come on. Odd Rev's in a minister of the word placement, but clearly doing
diaconate work.
And I would, just as a sidebar, encourage people to go and check out Never Odd or Even stuff.
That's exactly
the
right.
Podcasts and the blogs and all the stuff. But that's a great example where, like, you know, he's been ordained into a minister of the word placement, but has found himself doing more diaconate work. And there are so many cases of the other way around as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, you're a great example. You're a deacon and find yourself doing minister of the word stuff.
Yeah. It's interesting though. I would find I don't know if I would feel called into a placement that was just to the gathered community. I don't think that that's my calling.
Neither.
I don't. Yeah, funny I should say that, yet I ended up at Uniting Heart and Soul.
Here we are.
Yeah, I know. God's so clever, right, Jonty? Yeah. Because actually, if you think about that, it's just about trusting the Lord with all things. And God knew, and like God spoke to me about that as well. God was really clear about joining Uniting Heart and Soul and becoming the minister in that space. They hadn't had a deacon before, and B hadn't had a woman before. So that was so bloody brave when you think about it. And then I come in and I shake stuff up and move stuff around and do my deacon thing, and yet they are just thriving in the change, right? The community's thriving, and it's doing its thing. It feels like I'm just so glad I said yes and didn't do nerny. I don't want to go there. I just was obedient, really, again.
Yeah.
I think if you be obedient to the call, I think God is going to sort it out for you. He's He's not going to want you in some place that you're not a square peg in a round hole. He's going to either chisel the edges of the community or chisel your edges so that it is a beautiful fit.
Or find a different hole.
Yeah, maybe. I was lucky I didn't have to find a different hole. It was beautiful. It's going great, Guts. Yeah. Good question, Jenny.
Yeah, great question. Great question.
I hope we've done it justice.
There's so much more that we can probably get into another time.
I think we should put down below in the show notes the Uniting Church Synod New South Wales Deacon Minister of the Word document.
Yeah, sure.
So people can have a really good look and get the real posh words that I was unable to say.
Yeah. We have another question.
Okay.
Also from Jenny.
Yeah.
We actually got a bunch of questions from Jenny, which is great. Thank you.
She was paying attention, wasn't she?
She was. She says, I believe we are created for community. How can we create community that is honest, authentic, and where people can be vulnerable, but also avoid becoming a clique? This is like, I think this is a really, really important question and a really, really difficult question because I think both of us have experience with this where church communities can very, very quickly become cliques.
Oh, yeah.
And very exclusive.
And if
even if they're not like on the front foot exclusive, they can be very impenetrable.
Yep.
I come from for context for me, my parents had kids the same time as a bunch of their friends at the same church.
Yep.
So there's a handful of, more than a handful, there's a group of us that grew up together.
As babies.
Going to church together. And there's a big chunk of us that are still really close friends and still go to church together. So within my current church community, which is really starting to grow and flourish and explore some new things, within that big, larger group, there's a smaller group of people that grew up going to church together.
Like the originals.
Yeah. And even the way that we have just started framing this in this conversation starts to paint a picture of these guys are the important ones, the OGs, the original ones. And that's a problem.
Wow.
Is it a problem? That's the question, because
it's a problem if it becomes a clique.
If it becomes a clique, that's right. So this just like pulls up all these questions about what is church community, what are friendship groups, how do they overlap, how do you be inclusive while also honouring pre-existing relationships. Yep. Like there's such complexity in this that in my experience we're a little bit too scared to talk about. Well, because it touches on friendships and connections.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What do you think?
I think certainly when you walk into some churches, you can feel the click.
Yeah.
And there's no way you can crack in. You're not going to crack into 25 years of deep relationship that you've gone through postnatal depression together, lost children, marriages broken down, you name it, the kids doing HSC, the whole thing, all the things in life.
You do life together.
You do life together, yeah. How are you going to be the new person that walks into the church and then cracks in to that group? How are you going to be the new person with a gifting in playing the flute and this church that you've cracked into because you've just moved from the country now to the city? How are you going to crack in and be a part of their music worship team? How are you going to do that? There's already got a flautist. She's been playing flute for 15 years. You're not going to take her position. Piss off. Churches are cliquey.
Yeah.
It's bloody dangerous. I've been on the roster for making tea and coffee. It's my job. That is my job. You will not have. Don't take my job from me.
Yeah.
You know, it's a thing.
Yeah. Part of the question is like how we create communities that are vulnerable.
Yeah.
And the for me, a really, really challenging part of this is I know I have people that I know I can be vulnerable with, that I am vulnerable with. As soon as that widens, you're less likely to be vulnerable, right? Not because you don't trust people that you're less familiar with. Maybe you don't trust them. But it's a lot harder to be vulnerable with someone when you don't know how they're going to receive your vulnerability.
Yeah.
So, for example, I have 6 or 7 really close mates that I know, that I can share anything with them and it will be safe. Yeah. And vice versa, they know that they can share anything with me, right? That level of vulnerability isn't present necessarily in our Bible study group.
Right.
For example, we had 16 people at my house the other night.
Wow.
Which was amazing. Yep. So good. But just by nature of how many people are now in that group, it's not actually physically possible, or I would say healthy, to have that level of deep vulnerability that I have with that close inner circle with a larger, wider group, which by nature of how many people are in that group, you don't have the same relationship with all of those people. And that's really hard. And so I still, having this conversation now, there's a bit of guilt in my chest at identifying that, because I kind of have been taught and grown up in an environment where everyone is your best friend.
Wow.
Love everyone. Everyone is in your inner circle. That's not physically possible.
Yeah.
That's emotionally exhausting.
Yeah.
And so how do you do that? How do you still have that vulnerability with those people, but still hold that larger circle of church community just as valuable without damaging those relationships where, like, I don't know. How do you communicate to someone that you go to church with that you're not as close with as you are with someone else at church, that you're just not able to have the same vulnerability with them that you are with someone else?
Yeah.
And maybe it is the answer to all of this. We actually just need to like suck it up a little bit and just be vulnerable. Like maybe that is the challenge, is like being vulnerable is scary. It's easy to be vulnerable with people that you know it's safe with. It's really hard to be vulnerable with people that you're not quite sure how it's going to be received. Maybe it is suck it up and be vulnerable. Like,
wow.
I don't know.
I love that. I think.
But in saying that, that's how people get hurt.
Yes. Yeah.
You open up and you're vulnerable and you're ridiculed, you're laughed at, it's tossed away, it's not treated with the right amount of respect.
Weaponized.
Or it's weaponized. Like that's how people get hurt. So
Very much so.
It's so complicated. So you're about to say something. I'll cut you off.
Oh, I see it in church on just Sunday mornings when we have less gregarious people in the congregation that find it harder to break into the conversation around morning tea. So what I try to do, and I think leaders should try this, is to try and incorporate them into the wider conversation. And I do this thing where I introduce them there by name to others in the group by name, and the group will often say to me, Vanessa, we know their name. They've been coming for 6 months. And I say, good, that's excellent. Well, I'm doing it for my own memory then. But I'm doing it, it's quite strategic and deliberate because it's like an introduction.
Yeah.
You know, there's this person on the fringe out there that you're not including in the conversation. I'm bringing them into the conversation and I'm naming them into the conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really important because then what I find I do is that I can then just watch them take hold in the conversation. Then I move out of that conversation and I'll go to another group of conversation and I'll do the same thing again over there to try and draw everybody into some circle of community if they're on the fringe. And I think that's really important. If more of us did that, then less people would feel on the outer, or maybe wouldn't feel that we were so bloody cliquey, and would feel like they're a part of what's the inverted commas the in group, maybe.
Yeah, I definitely think like we need
to try harder.
If you are a church person, like being really aware of the situation.
Yeah.
Like if you are with your close group, inside jokes, all the stuff.
Yeah.
No worries. Go
off.
But when you're with those people in a larger group,
Right.
I think that's when it's really important to be super aware
Yep.
and include everyone.
100%.
Because I've experienced both sides of this where I've suddenly realized that I'm like perpetuating this cliquiness.
Yeah.
And I've kind of gone, oh shit.
Particularly if you're doing the OG, you're doing the
That's right. Yeah.
Remember when we said this and we did that and
Yeah.
then 20 of you go ha ha ha, but there's another 20 that don't know that.
Yeah. Or even worse, another 3
Yeah, that's even worse.
who just feel immediately on
Right.
the outside.
Yes.
But I've also been on the other side where I've gone into a church setting and gone, I
Yeah.
do not belong here. I do
yeah.
not belong
yeah.
here,
Yeah.
and I am not one of the in-group. And I have a secure enough sense of self and identity that doesn't necessarily bother me as much as it could maybe other people. But when you realise that, you kind of go, okay, do I need to force myself in here, or do I just, is this not for me?
Well, I just don't feel like I'm in the in-group in the Uniting Church.
You and me both.
Been, brother.
You and me both.
I just never have been in the, I don't know who they are in the in-group, but I'm not in it.
Yeah.
But I'm a deacon, so I float on the
Yeah.
outside.
I mean,
That's okay.
I grew up on punk, and I kind of go, yeah, fuck yeah, like, fuck the in-group. The edge is where it's at anyway, so...
That's too funny. I think I learnt, while we were chatting, I'm reflecting on how did I know to do that introductory thing in the circle. I think having been in the in-group in the fitness industry for such a long time, sort of setting culture in a way by the way that we would behave.
Yeah.
As an instructor of a class of people, it's really important to have everybody included in the conversation, the cross conversations, so everybody feels like they're a part of what's going down.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I learnt the name thing, to introduce people to each other. So to set up friendships with people that may not know each other, and because you get to, as a gym instructor, you know them all, but then set up these little, hey, Jenny, do you know Peter? And Peter, do you know Julie? And do you know, guys, you all work in pharmaceutical? You know, all that kind of thing, and because you know that information, and you could foster relationship there. But that's come about from the class that you've instructed. I think that's where I learnt those skills.
Yeah.
And I by nature try to apply that myself, I think, in the church space, because I've spent 35 years doing that in the gym. It's just how I know how to do groups of people.
I just had a thought. I hadn't thought about this in a long time. I used to play Aussie rules for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And the team I played with, we had this and we had a really incredible coach who coached me the whole time I was with this team. You did, from the moment you turn up to the ground, you operate as a team.
Yeah.
When you warm up, you do a lap around the oval. You don't start anything until the whole team is there.
Wow.
And we run a lap really tight.
Yep.
Like we're almost brushing shoulders. From the moment you arrive to the ground to the moment you leave, you operate as a team. And we would get lit up by our coach if someone got left behind from something.
How cool.
Or if someone missed a handball and 2 or 3 people didn't come up and try and encourage them during the game after they made a mistake or they missed a kick or they whatever. As a team, like we're operating as a unit. And I think that's a really good model that like in church, like
bring everybody
we're
along.
here to be in community.
And inclusive.
Within that club, within that team, there are people that I was friends with. There are people that I probably spoke to twice that I never saw again after I stopped playing Aussie rules. But when we were training, when we were playing, when we were competing, I would have I literally would gone into fights to for their cause. It was such a tight-knit team built community. And I think that's a really good analogy maybe for church because you go to church with people that you would never socialize with, and that's really important and that's so valuable.
Yeah.
Like that's part of what church is.
Like the
is
thing you have in common is Jesus.
Exactly.
Yeah,
like there's so many people that I go to church with that I probably would never like choose to social. I wouldn't go and like introduce myself to them at a social setting. In the same way that I don't choose my family. They're my family.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that to shy away from that is actually to misunderstand what like Jesus calls us to do in community, is to actually like do life together.
Yeah. And that means all together often.
Yeah. The thing that's this is raising for me though is like maybe a different understanding of what church is in different movements. Is I look at, and I've heard hear stories about church movements that collapsed where it becomes a bit cultish, where your entire life is dedicated to the church.
Yeah.
I don't feel that way. My entire life isn't dedicated to Uniting Heart and Soul or Tomorrow Uniting or Evolve or whatever. My entire life is dedicated to following Jesus.
Right.
So what that translates for me is when I am at church, the church community is my family.
Fully present.
But it's also okay to have like friends.
Yeah.
And the reason I raise this is because like in church settings and in like when they can become cliquey is the perception that there's a smaller group within the group that do stuff together without everyone else.
And that happens.
And I've been in situations on both sides where I've gone, oh, why wasn't I invited to that?
Yeah.
But I've also been in the situation where I've been at a thing and people go, oh, why wasn't I invited to that? And that's really hard. And I wrestle with because my initial instinct is, well, not everyone has to be friends with everyone, but when you're at church together.
Yeah, yeah.
But then some would say that their theology around church is like you do life together. Everything you do, you include the whole community. I find that really tricky because like we said, there are people that you wouldn't necessarily hang out with that you go to church with.
But you're in a really big church and that's not possible. You can't do that.
If you're in a church with like
10
20 people,
different story.
Sure.
You know, but you're in a massive church. So it's not actually possible. And I suppose your OG group, you've travelled life together very intensely and you've got so much shared memory together. It's not unreasonable just to want to be with them some of the time. I think that's healthy and good. And I think I have found as I've got older, I used to love hanging with a bigger tribe of people. But I've found as I've got older, it moved away to maybe clusters of, say, 4 or 5 couples and we'd all hang out together, or weekends away, or skiing or adventures and stuff like that, to down to I'm happy just doing one-on-ones with couples. Do you know what I mean? And just having really deep, powerful, connected conversation. Otherwise, if there's too many of you, it can be a little bit not as deep and not as...
I'll go even further with that. I was at a social thing over the weekend and almost had a panic attack. Yeah, wow. Just because too much. Yeah. Too much. There were 4 fucking conversations going at any one time all night.
I'm not good at that,
mate. Couldn't keep up.
No. Yeah.
And
overwhelming.
It got to a point and we got home and my partner was like, you okay? I was like, no, that sucked.
Yeah. Yeah.
I need smaller groups.
Yeah.
I need smaller groups. Like I just can't cope. And that's a reflection on me. But like
it's not that you can't
I don't
cope.
have the capacity.
It's your preference.
Yeah.
It's your preference.
Yeah.
And I know a little bit about your personality because we've done all those sort of personality tests now. And
Enneagram and all that stuff.
And you, that speaks perfectly to who you are as an individual. You are kind of a one-on-one kind of guy. This is how you roll.
Yeah.
And that's your preference. And it's beautiful that you can work that out now and people will understand. You really don't have to even explain it, or they don't need to understand.
Yeah.
Because your preference is your preference.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you don't love them if you're not hanging out with them.
Yeah.
You know?
But it's like, I want to hang out with everyone.
Yeah, just not all at once.
Just not all at once. Just not all at once, please.
Yeah,
that sucks.
Yeah. We had a party for Rob's 60th a couple of weeks ago and we had, lot of our really close friends were there. Some couldn't make it, but it was really beautiful surprise for Rob. But I found that overwhelming. Really, 16 people.
Yeah.
I just couldn't have a deep and meaningful conversation with anybody really.
Yeah.
They were all, I mean, I'm hosting the party, but it was that short, sharp grabs of conversation. I couldn't go deep, and I've realised as I'm older, I actually just am interested in deep conversation.
Yeah.
Because I really want to know what's going on in your life. I really want to know. I just don't want to know, you know, that you changed the battery in your Ford. I want to know depth of your life.
Yeah.
Deep
Yeah.
and meaningful convos. And that's okay.
Yeah. But and that is, to take this full circle, part of the reason I am so close with the people I'm so close with is because like we've had that level of relationship for so long.
Yes.
And I can't have that level of relationship with someone new if I only am interacting with them in a group of 20.
Yet,
exactly.
yes.
Like it's not
Doesn't
that I
mean
don't.
it won't happen.
Doesn't mean it won't happen, but it's like it has to actually start to happen in the same way. Like
Yes.
there has to be
Organic,
growth. Like actually investing into each other's lives.
You both have to be investing. It can't just be one-sided,
It cannot
Jonty.
be one-sided.
You've both got to equally invest. And you know there's those friends that they take,
Oh, yeah.
and they don't reciprocate
Yeah.
with the convo. It's always about their agenda.
Yeah.
It's got to be an equal thing. Or sometimes when you meet, and I've got friends where we meet and they're really in need, and so I'll listen and we do them. But then on the flip, I might be really in need one time and they listen and care for me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not all. Our life is so busy that we don't always have time for everything.
Yeah.
But in the scheme of things, it needs to be a two-way balanced thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I think so.
I 100% agree. I think I'm much more comfortable now than I was in not cutting off, but like just not worrying about the relationships that start to flounder a little bit when they're just one-sided. Because it's like I've got to the point with some of them where I'm like, oh, I've given and given and given to that relationship and I'm still not getting anything back. So I'm going to stop giving.
Yeah, and see what happens. And they don't. Nothing happens, does it?
Well, if something does happen, you go, oh, great.
Oh, wow.
You start a conversation and it picks up again. But if it doesn't, good to know.
Yeah,
I'll leave that one there.
Yep.
Yeah.
I call that cleaning out the phone book.
Yeah.
In the olden days when we used to have phone books.
And it may just be because that they don't have the capacity.
Or they're not into you as much as you're into them.
Yeah, totally.
And that's okay too.
And that's fine. I think part of it like having the humility and the self-reflexivity and the self-awareness to be able to apologize to people.
Yeah.
And just name some of these things, because I think so often it's wrapped up in like the cultural niceties and the kind of like the faux politeness that we all pretend that we have to do.
Wow.
Whereas if you're actually like interested in being in close relationship with someone, none of that stuff really matters.
No.
You're able to just talk
Cut
to each
through.
other and just cut through that crap
Bullshit,
and just get straight into it. And so being able to say to someone, hey, I'm really sorry that we haven't caught up in the last however long.
Yeah.
I've just been really busy with X, Y, and Z. That's not an excuse. That's what's been going on with me at the moment. I'm sorry I haven't been as present for you as you would have liked.
Yep.
Can we go get coffee?
Yeah.
How often has anyone ever said that to anyone? Like certainly, like, I don't know, that maybe for our listeners, like when was the last time you needed to say that to someone?
I've often said, rung a girlfriend and said, I've been a shit friend. Really sorry, I've been really busy and I've been a shit, neglectful friend. Can you please forgive me? Can we please book 5 dates in a row?
Yeah.
And I'll go and do that.
Yeah.
But I wanted to also say that some of Rob's and my best, dearest friends in the world live on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
And we don't get to see them throughout the year. We might speak to them every 2 months. We might do some Zooms.
Yeah.
And then we might see each other once a year or once every 18 months, plan a holiday and link up together. Do you know what? When you've had those deep, beautiful relationships like you talk about with your OG, these relationships just pick up from where you left off last time. And there's as if no time has passed.
Yeah.
And they are special. They really are special. They're special relationships. And you don't need to be seeing each other all the time. it's geographically impossible for us, but you don't even need to be on the phone with them all the time or communicating all the time, because you just go about doing your life and you know when you get together it's going to be great.
Yeah.
And that's important too. And as you end up being married and your partner becomes your full-on best friend, so you've got a whole new best friend living arrangement thing going down, that your partner ends up occupying a whole lot of your time that you would have spent with other friends as well. And you end up doing a bit of coupley stuff. So you might actually be experiencing a bit of change because the two of you are now doing the two of you. You're not just doing Jonty,
We've
but
been
you're
living
doing
each other for a handful of years
Jonty
now.
and Claire. You're like a unit, and you travel like as a unit. But I mean, I think healthy relationships are also the ones that give each other the space to go off and be friends with all their other friends 100%. As well. You know, I think that's really important.
I think we all know the couple that in all of our settings, I'm sure we all have that couple that we know where it's like, oh, sorry guys, I can't do the thing because I have to do something with my partner. I never understand that. Like, it's actually really important for me that my partner gets to go out and hang out with their mates.
Yeah.
And vice versa. Like when I'm heading off to the pub with best mates.
I know.
Have fun. See when you get home. Like that stuff's really important.
It's so healthy.
Yeah.
So healthy. I don't want to go to musical theatre with Rob because he'd fuck my night.
I don't take Claire to horror movies.
No way. He would ruin it. He'd be like a wet blanket.
Yeah.
He'd be bored shitless. He wouldn't smile. He'd fall asleep and snore, and I'd be embarrassed. I want to go with somebody that wants to have the happy, joyful experience of doing the Disney production with me. Do you know what I mean? So I take Rachel Humphreys when I go. She's just like fun on steroids, that girl.
I think to take this full circle back to the inclusivity and vulnerability, I think it's just like really practically being really aware of the setting.
Yeah.
And kind of going, who is here in the room that maybe doesn't feel included?
Yeah.
And just that being a constant, like almost third, like you have a third eye, just kind of checking that.
Beautiful.
You know, something that my Bible study group has been doing the last little while, probably longer than we've needed to, is because we've been growing in numbers a little bit. We'll just go around the circle and introduce ourselves again, every week.
So good. That is so good.
And we kind of like make fun of it a little bit because someone will say, "Hi, I'm Jonty," and then I go, "Hi, Jonty," like, you know. But like, because when you get to a certain capacity as a community, as a church group, we'll use that language, you never quite, unless you're keeping like a spreadsheet, sometimes you can never really know who is only just crossing over with who for the first time.
So interesting.
And sometimes when you're in a group that big, it's really awkward to come up and be like, we might have met before and I'm really sorry. My name is blah, what's your name?
Yeah.
And actually doing that formal introduction when it seems like everyone in the room already knows each other.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I think it's great. But I think as a leader, I think the way that you're managing things by including people, watching the people on the fringes and drawing them in is really important. And because you're a leader in that space. So I think you need to model that inclusivity.
Yeah. I think and the vulnerability thing is really, because I went on a bit of a rant before about like it not being always safe to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
I think the two things are true, right? Number one, the biggest conduit to being vulnerable is someone else's vulnerability.
Yep.
So I think it does take someone being a bit brave
out.
And sharing
Be that
and being
guy.
vulnerable.
Be the guy.
That is true.
Yep.
Also true,
Yep.
oversharing
Yep.
can be really damaging.
Yep.
I've experienced this. I'm sure people listening and watching have experienced this before as well, where suddenly someone overshares something and it brings up a whole bunch of stuff for people that they weren't prepared to get into.
Yep.
In both situations, self-awareness is key.
Yep.
Reading the room. Hey, we're having a conversation about X, Y, and Z with these particular people who are also here. Is this the right time for me to open up about X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
Sometimes we get that wrong and we have to show grace to each other when that happens.
I get that wrong a lot.
And we just have to own it.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And like on both sides, just showing grace and being okay with it and moving on and looking after each other. And part of being vulnerable with each other is actually then looking after each other in the process as well.
Yeah, that's right. But you can only really be responsible for your own self. You're not responsible for how everybody else responds in the world.
Correct. Oh yeah, 100%.
Right?
That's the
tough.
two things are true. It's a bit of it can be a bit of a like those two things can be in conflict at the same time sometimes. And that's a bit messy sometimes.
Can be.
Where someone can feel safe enough to share something really important and vulnerable that suddenly feels like a bit of a bomb being dropped for the rest of the room.
And sometimes then there's God's in the middle of all of that. And my experience in home church when that stuff has happened, God has the room to do some of God's best work.
Yeah. For sure.
In everybody, because we can all learn from each other's stuff. And if we're learning grace and patience and peace and kindness, then how good's that?
Yeah.
And that person in that time, we've got people in our church that do that often, right? And it's just got to love them. That's where they're at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just love them through it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Be everything that God calls us to be. Boy, this was an interesting conversation. Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Oh, that was felt like we covered a whole range of things.
Yeah. I'm going to have to do a lot of thinking after this because I'm very, as an introvert, I am prone to the old overthink.
Yeah, okay.
And so, yeah, social interaction and that kind of stuff. Yeah. I get anxious thinking about that stuff and wanting, like I'm a textbook people pleaser and I'm working on not being that.
Okay.
Like my brain panics if I even consider the idea of saying no to someone.
Oh, right. Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
For example. And so the idea of putting boundaries up in relationships, really, really, really hard. And so this conversation around
this is wonderful,
being able to hold church groups and friendship groups and all different, holding them all in tension and balancing them, I find really, really stressful.
It's really good growing, and that takes practice.
Yeah.
Because you know what you find? The people that really love you and care for you, if you pop up a boundary, they're just going to love you and care for you anyway. They're not going anywhere.
And the people that don't,
well, they weren't going to be.
Yeah, exactly.
They weren't going to be in the OG anyway.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Boundaries are good and healthy, and to survive this world, we need them. So you can practice no on me as much as you like. I'll still love you, Jonathan.
Yeah, and I think I probably want to just underline for people and emphasize not to feel bad about having close friends.
No,
I think the last thing I want to
gold.
do, and the thing that sometimes rubs me the wrong way when I'm feeling my most cynical about when this conversation comes up about inclusion and cliques and stuff, is that sometimes it can go so far as to demonize just having really close friends.
Yeah.
Like, how dare you be close friends with that person? That means you're less of a friend to this person. I know that's ridiculous and that's not the intention, but it can sometimes come across that way. This almost like communist, you have to be best friends with everyone.
Yeah, it's a bit FOMO.
That's impossible.
Yeah, that's right.
That's literally impossible. So you need your close friends.
Totally.
That's really important.
We're wired that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's okay. You don't need to be apologising for that.
It's part of the messiness of being human.
Yeah,
is
100%.
Relationship
Yeah.
can get messy.
Yeah. Great
And
convo.
Just got to come at it with love and grace.
Yeah.
And apologise when we screw up.
Say sorry.
I'm so sorry I screwed up.
Yeah.
And if that's all you can do when you screw up, I
Yeah.
think.
Get good at saying sorry. It's very healing for you and for the recipient. It's a great thing.
And I think maybe have a think. Is there anyone that you can think of in your community that might be feeling not included?
Yeah.
If there's someone that immediately comes to your mind, you should probably do something about that.
Yeah. How beautiful to give them a call or reach out or ask them out to lunch. And I think that's gold.
In fact, I'm going to go as far as to say, I know that people listening, if not everyone, there are some people, someone just came to mind.
Oh, wow.
someone did just come to your mind, reach out and fix that.
Oh, I love that. That's so exciting.
Do it. I'm charging you with that as your action for this week.
That is beautiful, Jonty. Fantastic. And if anybody's listening and they think that maybe they might think that I'm on the fringe because I'm a deacon and they want to include me in a cup of coffee, I'd be happy for that
reach
as
out.
well. I'd love that. I'm not joking.
No, neither am I.
I need a friend. I need a friend. Come in closer. I need a friend.
If you want to be friends with us, join our Facebook group.
Yes.
Join our Facebook group down below. There's some links to that where you can chat to us and chat to other people. This a lot of what we talked about today came out of some stuff that was happening in the Facebook group. So yeah, if you want to be involved in that, that's the place to
join
do it.
the convo. And you'll stick all the Uniting Church links below?
All the jargon that if people want to, like me, are suffering from insomnia and need a good way to go to sleep
at night.
We've got some documents for you to read. I'll put it all down below if you're interested.
Yeah.
Thanks for the questions, Jenny. And yeah, I think
super cool.
I can't remember what's next week, but it'll be something cool.
Yeah, always.
And tomorrow, if you're a listener of Into the Word, we'll be getting into some more of the fruits of the Spirit.
Yes.
So if you haven't jumped over to Into the Word at all at any point, now's as good a time as any. We're getting into the fruits of the Spirit.
Bite-sized dose of the Bible.
That's right. In little 10-minute chunks, we'll be
Yes.
going through Galatians and fruits of the Spirit. So we'll see you tomorrow if you're joining us there. If not, next week.
Yeah, thanks for playing, Jonathan.
Thanks, Reverend Vanessa.
Thank you, Pastor Jonathan.
We'll see you next week for another episode of Filthy Hope.
Bye.
Catch you next time.
This is a prayer for the people who want to give up, who have been hurt beyond repair and cannot bear to see your face in anything. Find peace in letting go of the guilt that is in yours, and find hope in understanding. Life is not a game you have to win. Forgiveness overwhelming, salvation undesired.